Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Khym.
And I'm Bob Schuchts.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration.
If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restoretheglory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory.
Hey, Bob. Good to be back with you. We are in our fourth part of this series about healing our primary relationships. So we did our first one about healing our relationship with God, and then we had a two-part kind of on healing our relationship with ourselves. The first one was with Dr. Peter Malinowski. That was really great, and hope people are really blessed by that. And then we did some commentary on that. And so we're at the final one here on healing our relationship with others. So Bob, we both kind of thought of the same scripture about where to start. So do you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, and I don't have it in front of me, but it's one that we all know. And
if we don't know this one, I think we got to go back to school.
Which is the scribe coming up and asking Jesus, "What's the greatest commandments?" He said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself."
Yeah. What struck me about that, I thought it was neat that we both on prep went, yeah, that's the scripture we should talk about.
Yeah.
There's an interesting subtlety, it seems, that there's an order to the commandments, almost a hierarchy of them. And when we were praying about it, I noticed number one is loving the Lord. That's a primary, that's number one. And then the second commandment has two parties in it, others and me. But it seems that Jesus is implying that being at peace and loving myself precedes loving other people. And I sure know that's been my experience in my life as well as working with other people. If I'm not at peace with myself, if I'm distressed with God, my love of other people is significantly affected.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So I think maybe one of the first parts that we want to start with is, let me say it like this. I find that in my attempts to love other people, it's like a mirror that shows me in some ways how I'm doing and how I'm doing with God. And it reveals all kinds of stuff to me. And there's where it gets interesting, and sometimes where I throw in the towel or get irritated because all my insecurities and immaturities, etc., are being exposed a lot of the time in my relationship with other people. Because I can make up any excuse for myself, and God's very kind. And yeah, thoughts there?
It's hard to look in that mirror sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not always pretty. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think about a friend of mine, and in the scriptures, talking about the scriptures being a mirror, like looking at God is a mirror, when that's the true mirror.
Right.
But we also can see it reflected in our relationship with other people. And that sometimes there's a distortion in the way that they're bringing their stuff to us and aren't giving us real feedback. But if we're conscious of what's going on inside of us when we're relating to other people and we're paying attention to how well we're loving them,
yes,
that's where it becomes a mirror. It's like it just exposes the places where we're out of sync with ourselves and out of sync with God.
It reminds me of the acronyms, the first word that comes to my mind, but it's really almost a curriculum of anthropology or human formation, which is RIM, relationship, identity, mission. And if we put, what is our mission? What are we called to do as Christians? To love our neighbor. How does that occur well and healthily? Through primary relationships, primarily with God, and then our knowing who we are and our identity in God. And it's from that place that we go out and love well. And if those dynamics are not settled, often what happens is we end up trying to find ourselves by what other people think of us.
Yes.
And that's the inversion, where it becomes, instead of RIM, relationship, identity, mission, it becomes mere mission. Here's what I do, and I hope it tells me who I am so that then I'm lovable.
Yeah.
And that inversion is really problematic. And That's when relationships really get messy, is when I'm going into a relationship with someone else and trying to love them to get something for me.
Yeah. Last time we talked about the woman at the well, and it's a perfect illustration of that, which is, she's worshiping all these different gods because that's what they did in Samaria.
Mm-hmm.
And then she felt a lot of self-hatred and shame because of the way that she was relating to other people and using them and being used by them. But you see that her trying to get something. I mean, that's the picture of being married 5 times and then the 6th, trying to get something from that relationship. And in that, just getting more and more broken until she meets Jesus. And she meets the true God who has this singular love for her that's a true and pure love, which then allows her to see herself and face those places that are a block. And then she goes out and wants to tell. Now she becomes a missionary, right?
Yeah.
She goes out and brings everybody else into that reality.
You notice what's striking me? I've never thought about this before. And in some ways, that exchange with the Lord at the well is also settling her within herself. As she's being settled with the Lord, they even talk about like cultural heritage. Like they're even talking about what nationality she is, her religious, what religion she, like Jewish or Samaritan or whatever. Like there's all kinds of interesting identity dynamics that are very subtly going on between the two of them. Then she goes out once she's settled again.
Yeah.
I haven't ever thought of that until right now. I'm like, man, they go through a lot. Her sin, her seeking identity apart from I'm wanting something, and the Lord saying, no, I'm the answer to what you're looking for. And well, how do I pray? What am I supposed to do? How's this look?
And how do we worship? Yeah.
I had never thought of it like that. That's beautiful layers there. Bob, I think something that is often the case, and it goes unsaid, but it's extremely obvious, which is loving other people is the best thing and maybe the hardest thing, because it requires something of you. There's always a pouring out in loving other people. And when you said missionary, it made me think it's from that primary relationship with God where we find ourselves and we find Him that we are filled. And then we go and pour out. And it's in Deus Caritas, I think paragraphs or section 7, where Pope Benedict talks about to be this spring of water for other people, you first have to constantly drink anew, is the language I really like. You have to constantly drink anew from the original source. And that nuance, I think, is something that I think a lot of times we go, hey, Jesus said, I got to love people. And that's kind of this, well, love your neighbor. They'll know we are Christians by our love, all that stuff. And we go, oh, that's what we do. And then we go out there and it's like going out and, like playing a football team and just getting destroyed and going, that didn't go well. How do we adapt? What went wrong?
Yeah.
And it sure is this place where it requires a lot of us. And I think that's where a lot of people just go, I'm out. I don't want to do this. It's too hard.
Yeah, it's so interesting as you're describing that dynamic. I'm thinking about early on as we were kind of going and teaching people in this healing ministry, there was this kind of subtle conflict between the healing schools, the healing camps, and the social justice camps. The social justice camps would say, you're being too self-centered, focusing on yourself and all that healing stuff. You should be out there serving people.
Yeah.
And the healing people would say, well, yes, we're called to serve people, but we're only going to serve people as well as we've experienced the healing love of God ourselves. And, you think sometimes, and I know I've made this mistake, and, probably we all have, is, reading the spiritual works of mercy and the temporal, the physical works of mercy. What are they called?
Corporal
works of mercy.
Yeah.
We can go out and clothe the naked and feed the hungry and do all the things from a place of our hearts that is kind of condescending and looking at them as an object and fulfilling out of our
Yes.
guilt and out of our fear,
Yes.
if we don't have a right relationship with God in that place, and if we're not experiencing the healthy kind of self-love,
Yes.
then we're not going to be, we haven't gone into those places of our own heart where we're
Yes.
sick and naked and imprisoned.
Yes.
If we don't go there, then the person becomes an object that we're doing something to, or we're having pity upon in a kind of a condescending way, rather than really being able to see their dignity. I mean, that's what love is. At its ultimate is being able to see the dignity of another. And as we see them in their dignity and their true worth, it's not, here I am helping you. There's an exchange taking place. And I don't know if you've experienced that often, but I do, is whenever I'm in a right posture of my heart, I'm always receiving something as I'm giving.
Yes.
Because there's a person who, whatever their external circumstances, has such a depth and such a richness.
Yes.
That I'm able to appreciate in them.
The times that I've experienced that are because I'm at peace.
Yep.
Right. I come into the situation and I'm settled. I feel fairly settled with God and with myself. And that's the difference maker. It's me in the situation.
Yeah.
And then no matter what's going on with the other person, I can roll with it and maneuver and navigate. It's something, Bob, I noticed that when I come down and we do ministry together, I've asked myself this question because the primary thing that I'm doing there is loving other people. That's my purpose for being there. Is the whole point of me being there. And I've asked myself, why is it easier there than other places? And as I've sat with it, I've realized because as a team, we work very hard, and it's not like it's hard work, but it's just, it occurs. We try to love each other very well in a first way. And because there's so much safety and security there, I feel settled. It's like, I know I'm good with God, and I pray more when I'm there. My normal life allows it. I mean, my normal life doesn't allow as much space, so there's more room for me to connect with the Lord, and I'm in a very safe space. So I feel loved by the rest of the team and secure. Then when I go out and love people, the burden is low, the yoke is easy.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting dynamic because that isn't always the case when I'm in my daily rhythms here at home. And I think that's an interesting nuance that for me is very helpful to realize, because it begs the question, what's going on at home?
Yeah.
Where I'm not necessarily feeling that. And, and I think some primary things are community, the difference of community, the space that the other things afford, because loving others, it's a taxing thing. Like, it's not easy to just constantly be loving other people. But when you have the environment and the structures, like if I'm praying consistently, and I am in really solid faith-based community where I am secure.
Yes.
The third one, it rolls,
it's natural outflow. Yeah. It's security, maturity, and purity, right? That just flows right out.
It totally does.
Yeah. You've got to factor in the Holy Spirit on those weeks and all the people that are praying that give us a grace also.
That's a good point.
To be able to be in that kind of a spiritual environment. But it's also intention. There's an intention there that I'm really focused and this is what I'm here for, as opposed to kind of when we go back into our normal day-to-day lives, a lot of our unmet needs come up and we're looking for a spouse or friends or children or somebody else to meet us there.
It's very true. I think I operate with the general rule of thumb that if something's going on in my struggle with people and trying to love them, I immediately go back to God and me. And something you nuanced there when we were talking about the camps and the potential disagreements amongst various camps in the churches. I don't know why, but I've been formed for so long in this approach where if my love of other people is not going well, I need to look back at God and me, get that situated, and then get back into loving people. Now, a lot of people, I think, misunderstand that to go, oh, so I just pause all my loving of everybody in my world. Like, sorry, honey, I got some work to do. See you in a year. Like, no, that's not literally what happens. However, there's a primacy that's there. And I would say, in Heather and I's walk and journey, there's always been this emphasis and primacy of God and us as individuals. I mean, it's basic marriage therapy.
Yep.
Where you're going, wow, you, spouse, are triggering all this stuff in me that needs to be worked on so that I don't see you as my mom, or I don't experience you as my teacher or whatever. That's me.
Yeah. And that's maturity right there, is to be able to not look at, well, this person is so difficult, I can't love them well, or, that, I'm just not in the mood, or whatever that is. But just that recognition of, particularly in marriage, but when I made my vows in marriage, they were just vows to love, not to get coerced love from my spouse for me, right? It was just a vow to do that. But I'm also vowing to be open to receive love. And if I'm blocked on either of those, either my intention to love or my receptivity to love, then it's going to break down. And, as you're mentioning that, I got to a place in marriage therapy after I'd learned about inner healing prayer, and I'd worked with individuals a lot, is a couple will get into a middle of a conflict, and I could tell that it was just a loop that they weren't getting out of, that they were blaming each other, or they were misunderstanding each other, or reacting to each other. And inevitably in those moments, as I became more and more aware of just what you said, is I'd stop and say, okay, let's just stop. What's going on inside of you right now? What are you feeling? What are you believing about yourself? And then can we bring that to Jesus? Then do that with the other spouse if that was necessary in both situations. And then now let's come back and talk about the issue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And it just unlocks it. And that's, I think, a really good illustration of what you're saying of how relationship with God and relationship with ourselves is key to the ability to be able to hear each other and love each other.
Yes.
Particularly in the intimate relationships.
I used to say to couples that marriage is not meant to be a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 30-year-old body playing house. Because 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds they don't have the maturity. But why is there a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old kind of pushing the buttons and pulling the levers of my heart? There's a lack of healing and maturity that's gone on. That makes my loving of other people immature. And throw kids and bills and mowing yards and all of that on top of a 12-year-old, and they're understandably totally overwhelmed and flooded. And they don't know how to navigate it. Bob, it brings me to another thing. I don't know if we want to shift this, but I feel like we're emphasizing to love other people well, I need to know God and know I'm loved by him, and I need to know myself and love myself, the healthy version. And yet, the third category, there remains what I call skill sets. The language I like is the art of loving. It's an art form.
Yes.
It's like, some people say, some therapists actually, emotion-focused therapy uses the analogy of dancing and learning how to dance with somebody. But loving other people, I think, is an art form.
Yeah.
Maybe we can zoom in there a bit, talk about that.
I remember really a very influential book when I was starting to be training for as a therapist. And it was written in the 1950s by, I think, a Jewish psychiatrist, and it's called The Art of Loving. And
Fromm?
Eric Fromm.
Yeah.
Eric Fromm. I haven't heard about him. I mean, he's deceased now, but I haven't heard anybody refer to this book or anything recently. But it was really influential at the time. And he said, the art of loving involves caring, respecting, responding, and knowing. And he says, if you start with caring for a person and caring not just from your heart, although that's important, like I care about you, I care about what happens to you.
Yes.
But that care is demonstrated, like a nurse cares for a patient in a hospital, And so how do I care? How do I nurture this person who I'm loving? How do I treat them with dignity? And then respect. And I loved the way he defined respect. He said it's respect. It's seeing again, seeing with new eyes. Kind of in the way Mother Teresa would see Jesus in every person.
Right.
And we're all called to do that.
Right.
And so where do we lose respect is when we define people by their brokenness rather than see them as an image of God.
Wow.
And so to respect somebody is to take a second look beyond the surface things.
Man, that's so good.
And then to be able to see them. And then to be able to respond, to have a healthy kind of responsibility, not a kind of a caretaker over responsibility, like a codependent kind of responsibility, but taking responsibility for myself first,
Yes.
like for my thoughts and my feelings and my actions, but
Yes.
then responding to the needs of another, like being responsive. That's part of caring, but it's a responsibility that I have, that I've promised to care for this person. And then knowledge.
Knowledge, yeah.
Yeah, which is you can't love somebody without knowing them, right? Love becomes specific when you know them.
Yes.
So the more you know somebody, the more you can care and respond and respect in a deeper way. And, I think about that in terms of one of my favorite songs, which is just kind of a praise song that I sing often to Jesus. My one desire is to know you, Lord. My one desire is to love you, Lord. My one desire is to serve you, Lord. There's verses like that. Mm-hmm. But to think about that with the person in front of me. I want to know you first so that I can love you better, so that I can serve you better.
Bob, I love the simplicity. And I imagine if somebody just took those categories and imagined somebody in front of them and spent some time without them literally in front of them, almost preparing for loving well, you'd start to notice the little disturbances in your heart and, I don't like that about them. And, all that kind of stuff, which is part of the skill set of loving, is getting your own house in order before you go out and as you're going out and caring for other people. And it's so funny. I can't help but go, oh, right. I gotta keep looking under the surface. So we're going to set that aside. When you listed all those, I think that's just a great, simple skill set, right? If you could take a simple skill set like that and master it, your capacity to love other people would grow. It's a loose way to say that's growing in virtue, to throw another one on the table. I remember reading, I think Karen Horney, is the author, and she had this description, again, a psychologist, psychiatrist, can't remember what her profession was, but was in that realm. And she talked about the three primary ways that people relate to each other. And she said they move toward, they move away, or they move against. And I found those to be really helpful because what she nuanced, which I appreciated, was a healthy and unhealthy version of all three. It wasn't like all were unhealthy or all were healthy. There was healthy and unhealthy of all three. And so it's possible to move towards someone healthily and unhealthily. And I think we've just described that fairly well, where, oh, you're in need. I'm going to come towards you because I see you, I respect you, and I care about you. Or I'm going to move towards you because I want something from you. That's a clear line between healthy and unhealthy. And then moving away, it's very loving. If someone is harmful to you, I actually heard this said one time, and I thought it was really interesting. Let's say someone is noticeably very harmful. Someone said one time, and I can't remember who it was, they said, if you move away from that person, you're actually removing their occasion of sin, which is you. I was like, what?
That's a good perspective on that.
So in some ways, you're helping them not sin by removing yourself from the scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's there's nuancing to all these things, but it could be healthy to move away from someone who needs to start learning how to stand on their own 2 feet a bit. Yeah. So there's a bit of space. It's not like, see, I'm never talking to you again, but maybe there's a step back. Yeah. And yet there's unhealthy ways to do that. Yeah. Like I can't be around you because I need to protect myself.
Right.
So we move away. And then moving against, there's healthy and unhealthy ways to move against. And I imagine we can fill in the blanks there. How do those strike you?
Yeah, lots of thoughts as you're talking about it. Just on that last one, I was thinking about a podcast I was listening to, Jim Wilder.
Yeah.
and the life model, and he's talking about the enemy brain.
Yeah, there we go.
Now, when we have that kind of contesting fear of other people because we're against each other, then we move into what he calls the enemy brain, which is kind of a survival reaction to each other, which then blocks our capacity to love,
Yes.
as opposed to kind of a healthy way of being against somebody is to challenge something that's not healthy or challenge something that's not love.
Yes.
We don't come against the person, but we come against the thing that prevents that person from being loved or from loving.
It seems like that last one, maybe we can linger there for a little bit. If we look at our current culture,
Yeah.
goodness, like it seems that against, moving against has all kinds of crazy distortions.
Yeah.
And something that I've thought about it has been, if you don't know what you're all about and are settled in that, like have peace in that. So for example, maybe a position on some political issue or position on some moral issue, and you haven't, thought through it and reflected on it and come to terms with where you stand, then working that out while you're arguing with someone is not a very healthy way to do it. Or just doing it simply because of an emotionalism or this emotional dynamic of, well, when you say this, what it means is actually this other thing.
Yeah.
Like when you have a stance against something or for something, what it actually, this interpretation we put to it, and then we run with those interpretations, and they're not always accurate or true or based in reality, or they're fueled by our own woundedness. And so to be able to disagree, I think, is an essential part of loving well. But there's an art even to disagreeing.
Yeah, Bishop Aaron talks a lot about that, as we've lost the art of disagreeing, and now we just oppose each other in anger or resentment or judgment or whatever that is.
I think that was one of our attempts of how to disagree in love when we were doing our same-sex attraction series.
Yes.
That was one of the things we were trying to live out, was we're trying to love, but we don't agree. So how do you navigate that? And that was an attempt to do that. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback that's what people experienced was, I don't agree with you, but I'm not going to scream in your face.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there other things, like, Bob, when you've, over the years, if we keep talking about skill sets, like what are some things that come to mind? Because I think most people go, yeah, all that inner healing stuff, that's great, that's fine, but just tell me what to do. I just want to know what I got to do. Give me the 3-step magic pill. So maybe we can appease that a little bit. Like other things that you've come across or learned over the years regarding loving other people. Any tips, tricks?
Well, I think it's the most basic thing that you get formed in as a therapist, and you probably have a natural bent towards it in the beginning, is learning how to listen.
That's good.
Right? To learn how to listen in a relationship beyond my preconceptions of what somebody's saying, or beyond my defensiveness in what they're saying, but to really be able to hear their heart and what their intention is. That's a real art of loving. That's really a very core part of loving. It's being able to listen that way, and then to have compassion for the person.
Yeah.
You could put that all under the category of caring and responding, but that's how we come to know somebody, is by really listening to what they're saying, what they're feeling, what they're thinking, how they view things, and not coming against it immediately out of defensiveness. We may disagree with it, but we're really taking in and receiving the other person. We're respecting them in that way.
Yeah. I remember in theology programs, I remember a philosophy class where the teacher put in front of us people who were adamantly opposed to our worldview. And they said, your task is to really hear them. Yeah. And to see the value that they're bringing. And that's everything good. In you is like, no, I don't, this guy's crazy. He disagrees with the things I hold dear. Yeah. But it was a practice in this very thing of being able to attend to someone who you don't necessarily agree with, and having the patience, and to be able to, in some ways, to, it's funny, the language I was about to say, and I caught myself, was to set yourself aside. Yeah. And I don't really like the language.
Yeah.
I think there's something more mature, which is I'm settled and I can engage in someone else and I don't have to disappear, but I also don't have to dominate or react to the other person. I can stay settled within myself in the Lord.
Yeah, John Paul II in the acting person uses the term transcend yourself, which I think is a better
That's good.
term. Yeah.
What do you think he means there?
Like we're able to move beyond our own interior reactions to the other person. It's like
Yes.
we're not bound up in ourselves.
Yes.
We're able to move beyond that self-centeredness.
Yes. There's another tool or whatever to throw on the table to me would be the art of responding. So if we start with listening, let's go to responding. And I would say listening can be easier because you could say you're listening and you're just sitting there and don't say anything. Like you can look like you're listening, but there's a time to respond. And I think, man, that's when we can get to, our wounds can get intertwined with our response. And then it can move very quickly from care and respect and the other things that Fromm said to what I want, what I need, et cetera, et cetera. And a subtle nuance I would say there would be self-awareness.
Yes.
Being aware of how I'm coming across, being aware of my typical ways of responding, noticing if I'm in a bad mood, that I might need to be careful with the people that I'm around and loving. I heard this thing. It was on social media. Tell me what you think about this. This guy was sitting with two people, and he was sitting with a couple. It was kind of an interesting scenario. And he said to them, try to be as honest as you can. And I was like, that's a good way to start a question. And he said, would you, in all sincerity, choose to have your spouse die the next morning and you get $10 million? Would you take that deal? And then it obviously catches you like, whoa.
Yeah.
And then he spun it to say, would you die tomorrow morning to give them $10 million? And it was this weird twist of a question to get you to access what was a priority and what was kind of going on and what was most important.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is that the couples were like, I couldn't do that. I couldn't wish your death to just get $10 million. And so then he did the final spin, which was basically to say something to the effect of, so you're saying every single morning when you see this person, they're worth more than $10 million.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And I was like,
yeah.
Okay. Now I kind of see where you're going. Like, it was a fun little spin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's one of those things like, how valuable is the person in front of you that you're loving?
Right.
That's kind of the principle of it. Are they worth more than $10 million? And when push comes to shove, I'd say most people would say, yeah.
And if not, that's a dangerous relationship, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, is it more important for you to have a financial security than a relational security?
Yeah. And do you love people, particularly the person who you committed your life to, more than anything else other than God, right?
Yeah. Another angle. Do you ever look at people who love well and study them?
Yes. I think not so much consciously, but unconsciously.
Yeah.
And I'm really attentive to experiencing people who love well.
Okay.
And wanting to be around them, and then kind of asking the question, what is it about them that they love so well?
Yes.
And it's like they see you, or they see other people that like can respect it. They understand, they get to know the person. So it's one of the things that I've kind of attended to. One of the people I've admired a lot is, a couple of people are the saints in our generation, which are Mother Teresa and John Paul II, and St. John Paul II. And I admired different things about each of them. With John Paul II, just his presence with people, and everybody that met him talked about this. It's like he is so completely present that he sees you and he's there as if you're the only person that matters in the world.
Yeah.
And there's just such a sense of the Lord's presence in that gaze, in that dynamic, And so, yeah, I really admire that in him. And his prayer life was the precursor to that. He was really present in his prayer life, and God was really present to him, and he brought that into relationships. And in a similar way, Mother Teresa, and again, I saw John Paul II from a distance at a thing. I never met Mother Teresa, but I read a lot of both of them, and read a lot and heard a lot. It's all documentaries and movies. Right. But with Mother Teresa, I think the thing that struck me was just in her prayer, in her adoration, being able to see Jesus in adoration in the Eucharist, and bringing that vision into every person she saw, no matter what the circumstances were. Yeah. And so again, before she did anything, she saw something. She saw them in a particular way, and then she cared, respected, responded, and got to know the person.
Yes.
Whatever their circumstance was. So, yeah, those are ones that I think about. But also on a natural level, I love when people are honest and vulnerable and caring. My wife Margie, one of the best traits she had, and people said this at her funeral, was, and it was people close in the family and people outside of the family all said the same thing. When I was with her, I felt like I was the most important person.
Wow.
And I felt like I was celebrated just being in her, just the way she responded with joy when I came into the room. I felt like I was celebrated as a person.
Wow.
It's like, wow, good thing to be able to have said about you at your wake,
Yeah, no kidding. I appreciate the three reflections, like maybe three saints. Two canonized and one maybe not yet.
Yeah. Margie had a lot of her own flaws too, but I imagine both of them did too.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. When you were talking about Mother Teresa, I couldn't help but, put myself in the situation and the circumstance, and it brought up the very point of this series. As you said, she's in adoration and sees the Lord, and then goes out and sees him and other people. And what struck me is I've gone to adoration and not had pleasant experiences before, or I'm frustrated at God or whatever. And that wouldn't be ideal to see that in other people. And what's going on there is my distorted views of God. He's not good. He's holding out on me, just the typical things that I can struggle with. And there's the illustration. Again, it goes back to, am I good with the Lord? And because I bring that with me. Yeah. That settles me or doesn't settle me. Yeah. And am I seeing a false image of him? I mean, it's interesting. We talked about sight with Fromm's. I think that's such a, like the eyes of our heart, if we use that as an example or an analogy. And what are the lenses that we're looking through when we see other people and try to love other people? And our wounds become a distortion that causes us to see people. And if you've got this like person who's fuzzy and kind of emotionally coming at you, it's like a monster, and you're like, get away, or fight, flight, freeze kind of thing. Or God, he can seem like an uncaring, distant idea in the sky, or a mean whatever. Again, it just struck me when you talked about her. Her relationship with God was primary. She preached that to her sisters, and that's what she brought out. Because if you don't love the Lord and feel secure with him, all of those people are a burden. Yeah. All of the poor are just a burden. Yeah. They're like, get rid of them. Like in some cultures, that's how they see and treat them.
Yeah. Like in our culture.
Yeah. It's true. So Bob, I want to finish the episode with something that I'm going to spring on you and I haven't prepped you for. I'm going to ask that in honoring of this loving others thing, category, that you and I share vulnerably with each other a way or two that we see that the other one loves well, loves other people well, and a way that we see that maybe the other one could grow in loving other people.
Wow. All right.
You up for it?
Yep. That's good.
Okay. So I think not only is it interesting content, but it hopefully models. I completely trust you. And so I have no fear of stepping into this domain with you, which hopefully will model maybe loving well. You want to go first? No, that's not fair. Okay. So how about let's do a ping pong where we'll share one way that we see each other loves well, and then we'll see based on time where we go from there.
Yeah.
And let's give each other room to ask questions and clarify and all that kind of thing.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yep.
Okay. I would say I could come up with numerous ways that I see that you love people well, but one of the ways that I see that you love people well is the word that comes to my mind is patience and kindness, but that feels inadequate to what I experience or see. Another word in that domain would be generosity. I get a somewhat of a glimpse. I don't have like this perfect picture of your life behind the scenes, but I do get to see your life behind the scenes. And you're making a gift of yourself for decades isn't easy. And I see you continually being generous, almost to the point where it irritates me, because I'm like, man, I feel like I should be that generous, but I don't know how, or I don't have the capacity. So patience with need, kindness with need, and generosity with need. I think it's actually one of the reasons that people feel so comfortable and safe with you.
Yeah.
And are willing to go to very, very vulnerable and deep places, is because you're patient with them and willing to let the process roll, as opposed to, okay, here's what we got to do, Yeah. I'll pause there. How does it strike you?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Yeah. As I reflect on that, I had more time to reflect since you were doing that, but I was listening, taking in what you were saying too.
Yeah.
I think there's two things. And again, we're in a context together where we're in conferences and we're playing together and we're interacting and we're doing all kind of stuff. So I'm experiencing you in those realms and then doing this together.
Yes.
But I would say the two things that stand out to me, these aren't the only two things, but the two things that stand out to me is your lighthearted vulnerability. It's like we go into a room together, whether it's with bishops or whether it's with seminarians or whether it's with priests or whether it's with therapists or lay people, those are the environments we're in together.
Yeah.
And you're the same in each of those places, just being yourself, being vulnerable and being lighthearted and laughing. I think people can experience that on the podcast too. It's just like, it's like you create community wherever you go. Because of that, it's like you put everybody at ease. It's like everything's not so serious. And that's one of the things that I do, is make things too serious. And with you, we're laughing while we're doing that, and yet it's laughing and vulnerability and communion together.
Yeah,
is one of the things that I experience.
Wow, thank you.
And then the other thing that I experience a lot is your accompaniment fatherhood. Accompaniment. That is, when we do events together and you're always with, like with a seminarian retreat or with the priest, you're always with the guys.
Yes.
It's like you're one of the guys playing with them, talking to them, and that sense of accompaniment. And it's almost comes out of your gift. The gift comes out of your woundedness of abandonment, is like, and it's not codependent. It's just you have a real sense of presence with people, to be with them, whether it's fun or whether it's serious or whether it's prayer or whatever that is. So those are two things that really strike me.
Yeah, thank you. That's the thing that struck me the most. And it's interesting, I hadn't thought of it until you said it, is lighthearted vulnerability, and that being across groups. Because when I pause and look at it, I go, that is the case. Like, that's just, I think that's my ideal environment. And but to see that as a blessing to people. Because the work can get pretty heavy. Yeah, it can get intense. Yeah. Do you want to do more positive, or do you want to go to a growth area?
Let's go to the growth area.
Growth area. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say one area, I'll speak for it from my experience. One area that I wish you would or desire for you to operate in is, I'm trying to find the right words for it. The word that comes to mind, the words are inadequate, but the word that comes to my mind is engaged leadership. I think because so many of us who are around you, and then the circles get very broad, the circles get very wide of people that see you and know you, is many, many people want your blessing or your affirmation or simply your engagement. And so I think I've even grown through that in our relationship, where maybe earlier on I was looking for more of a fatherly blessing from you, and now I feel very brotherly with you. And I think the thing that would bless many people is when you engage as a leader and your voice comes out, because it would often, in my mind, it settles a room. It has weight to it that can settle a situation or settle a room. It's almost like the elder in a room, and everybody's kind of going back and forth about something, and then the quiet one has been listening and discerning and goes, here's what I think the case is. And when I've seen you do that, I've seen the room just settle and go, yep, I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
And I've longed for that to be more present. Maybe I'm longing for it selfishly. I don't know. Maybe I'm longing for you to settle me. I don't know. But I think it's bigger than that.
Yeah, I think I hear it bigger than that.
Yeah.
So it's good. Let me just share some of the experience of that. I didn't respond much to the first thing that you said, but I believe that to be true. The first thing you said about the patience and kindness and generosity.
Yes.
And I believe this also to be true. Although it's interesting because there's a little bit of defensiveness that comes up.
Okay.
And I just want to name that because this is illustrating what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If there are places inside of us that keep us from loving,
yes,
it's usually places unsettled inside of us. And so the defensiveness coming up in relation to that. And so I'll just name the defensiveness before I talk about the truth of what you're saying.
Yeah.
The defensiveness is, well, there's so many people that want my time and attention, and I get tired, and all of that comes into play of but behind all that is a truth, which has to do with kind of stepping into, you use the word engaged authority, engaged fatherhood. It's like stepping into it rather than being passive, or rather than sitting back, or rather than being quiet.
Yes.
And so, again, some part of the defense is, well, that's just my personality. But there's also something else there, which is, as you're describing, it's a not maturing in love in a particular way that you're identifying that is true.
I appreciate your humility there. That what came up for me, just because I know your story so well, when I said it, and I hadn't thought about it till you started reflecting, was your dad left.
Yeah.
And so you didn't get example of that.
Yeah.
And then your older brother
left.
Was very unhealthy.
Yeah. And then I had to step into, at a young age, a level of responsibility.
Wow.
And so there's a pulling back from that.
It's probably feels like a crushing thing. Like, I don't want to do this at 10 or whatever. Please don't make me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Hit the racquetball back.
All right. I'm pondering this. I'm not sure. Hopefully it'll get clear as I share it with you.
Yeah.
But there are times, and I think it's more things that you've shared with me, and even shared on the podcast, than I've observed, although I can see it a little bit.
Yeah.
But, when we did the podcast with you and Heather, way back, I would really recommend people go listen to that.
Yeah.
Your vulnerability in that was beautiful, and the way both of you talked about how you'd walk through the history. But I remember coming up to a question, which is, Jake, how have you met Heather's heart in this place since then? You know, and again, that was a year and something ago, so it may be different right now. But it was like I could see a place where you were still in your own processing through that area of your heart, that you weren't able to then see her in her brokenness at that level.
Yes.
And, you know, I've kind of heard it in different places where it's kind of like that when something triggers that area of woundedness, it's kind of like you pull back inside and you're not able to step into that role. And, you know, you've talked about it in terms of the 12-year-old in marriage, you know, the 10-year-old in marriage or the 8-year-old in marriage. And when you get into that posture, you can't be a husband. You're still 8 years old. So there's no judgment. It is an understanding of where that is and how that has come about. And I think it's an area that you probably in this last year have grown even more in. But I heard somebody just share recently about a boy looks out for himself, a man looks out for others. And it's kind of like in those places, we probably all do this, but in those places where you get triggered in the young boy, you get more self-focused rather than being able to be the man who sees and cares about what's going on in the other in that moment.
That's a proverbial nail on the head.
Yeah.
And I think you described it very accurately, where I will get the boy in me will get flooded, overwhelmed, and then self-protective. And so need is out there, but it's now a question of resources. Will I die? That's a big way to say it, but it can feel like that.
Yeah.
If I go and pour out over there and I have to manage my resources, I have to make sure I'm okay. And I'm, you know, like it's take care of me first so that I can take care of other people kind of concept. But it's coming from a very unhealthy place.
Yeah. Or not yet secure place.
Yes. That's exactly what it is. I don't know that the Lord will provide.
Yeah.
And that I'm secure in that to where then I can pour out to other people. And it's very true. Like that, the joke I was saying in my head was like, I thought counseling notes were confidential. You're not supposed to read my account. But yeah, it's very accurate. And I get very, very stuck there. And what's interesting about it, just to try to share, to maybe give other people just room to explore their own story, is I don't have like a ton of memory there.
Yeah.
I have lots of body, feeling, and emotion there, which tells me it's probably young.
Really young.
Yeah, really young.
Yeah.
And so I flipped into survival mode at a very young age.
Yeah.
And didn't have pictures to go along with it. I have feelings that go along with it.
Yeah. Or thoughts or understanding or anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when there's strong need and that stuff gets activated, it's very emotional and almost swirly.
Yeah.
And so the healing process with that has been tough. And what's interesting about it for me right now in that healing process is when that stuff's opened up, man, is it raw and hard.
Yeah.
It is, because life still goes on, right? And so you're right in the thick of it. And so that's very much of where I am these days, is knowing I'll be okay if I love.
Yeah.
Because, man, that feels risky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you say that, I was just in an interaction yesterday where I could feel somebody's love and vulnerability and my own fear of really stepping in at a deeper level.
Yes.
And it really does. It feels almost impossible in that place where the protections are in the heart. You know?
Yes.
It's like, this is survival.
Yeah, very much. And yet an area that needs healing.
Yes.
And with healing, man, this is where I can find some hope, is that the flip side of that is really wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I guess the thing I would want to be, like you mentioned something, what a thing to have said at your wake,
Yeah.
which creates a really interesting question. What would you want to be said at your wake? And the decisions that you make now are what will lead to that or not lead to that.
Yeah.
I would love to be said at my wake, he learned to love very well.
Mhm.
Because if anybody's honest, they would say he didn't start with that. He learned to do it, and he sure learned how to do it well. That's an interesting and important reflection, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love what I heard Bishop Barron say about Bishop O'Connell on a recent thing as he was giving tribute. He said, Bishop O'Connell revealed Jesus to me in a way that nobody else in my life has done.
Yeah.
And not so much the comparison thing, but it's again saying the same thing. It's just a life given over in love, that Jesus' life just comes through and pours through, and that people can see and experience that. And
yes,
that would be what I would love people to be able to say at my wake.
Me too.
I got less years than you,
Well,
who knows? Yeah,
who knows? But yeah, hopefully that's why the work matters, eh? That's why you engage in it. Bob, I've appreciated it. This is good.
Well, thanks for your question. That was a nice twist. We didn't plan that one.
No, we did not plan that. You can expect those kinds of things from me. Oh, there's an offshoot of the road. Let's go drive over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things, just to land it, because this is an intimate moment with you and I know we have the capacity to do that, but yet we're recording. So I want to be sensitive to our listeners. What an interesting exercise to possibly do, but here's a caution. Make sure you do it with someone you know loves you and has a fairly decent capacity to communicate.
Yes.
And not make it personal.
And not make it an opportunity to criticize or condemn you or belittle you or get out their anger that they've been holding in for a long time.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That won't go well.
Yeah.
But in the right space and time with the right person, these kind of exercises can be really helpful. And here's a twist. I used to do this exercise with my children. I would ask them to tell me, as the parent, how's it going well? And what's something that's hard for you?
Yeah.
And let them speak out to me, the parent, this kind of thing. And I did that when they were a bit older and had a bit more maturity and weren't in a mood or didn't, want an iPhone or something. You try to time it well. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking as you were saying that, how the relationships that I really value in my life right now are the ones that we can have these kinds of conversations. Having people around me who can tell me with love places where I need to grow is just invaluable. I feel more loved in that than any other way.
It's so true.
Not that it's always easy to receive, but it's just like this person really loves me to be able to communicate that kind of truth in love to me.
Yeah.
And I don't get defensive when it's love. It's just like, what you're saying is true. And you're just saying it with such love, I'm disarmed.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Well, I do love you, Bob.
Yeah.
It's great to
love you too, Jake.
Yeah.
I probably can do it better, but we'll grow into that.
That's the journey that we're on.
Yeah.
Listeners, we hope this blessed you. And our encouragement to you is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. We'll talk to you again soon. God bless.